to Back from the Abyss. I'm Dr. Craig Heacock. A couple of episodes ago, I invited all of you to give me more direct feedback on the podcast, and I said, email me and we could set up a video or phone call. And these calls have been happening over the last few weeks, and it's been amazing. It's been just completely delightful. I've spoken with people from Australia, New Zealand, Boston, Tacoma, Washington, Eau Claire, Wisconsin, Salt Lake City, Boston, Atlanta. And interestingly, only one person from the top 6 places where Back from the Abyss gets downloaded. Our top 6 download places are Denver, Fort Collins, Chicago, Salt Lake City, Atlanta, and New York. Oh no, wait, we had one in Salt Lake, one in Atlanta. But I have to say, making a podcast is really an interesting process because, Chris and I are putting our heart and soul into this, and we put this out there. And, we get emails and I get texts from people. I get feedback, but it's sort of, it feels like doing a concert or a big presentation where you can't see anybody's faces or hear any of the reactions. So every time we release an episode, I'm on our server and I'm looking where it's getting downloaded, and I'm thinking, who's in Cedar Rapids, Iowa that's listening, and who is in Ridgeway, Colorado, and who is in Melbourne, Australia? And it's just so fascinating, interesting to me that I and the storytellers are sharing these really intimate things, but with this offer to speak with listeners, oh my gosh, it was amazing. So I set up these video calls with people, and boom, they pop on the screen, and instantly there was this really unusual and powerful connection. So, I think on their end, and many spoke to this, that hearing my voice and my stories and the podcast, it felt like people really kind of knew me and could trust me from the get-go. And even in the letters people wrote to ask to do a video chat, people shared some really powerful, hard stuff. And on my end, it was completely thrilling because I'm just wondering who is the audience? Like, who is out there and what do they think? And these video calls were completely bliss for me. I learned a lot. I cried during a couple of them. So, wow, it was a completely inefficient way to get podcast feedback because if I'd done a survey of all of you, it could have been much more probably complete and accurate data, but I asked each of the people a lot of questions and I got some interesting data. So one thing I was really pleased with is people said, almost everybody said they'd shared episodes with anywhere from like 5 to 35 people. And that really warmed my heart because I thought if you share one of these episodes, it must really be meaningful. About a third of the people I talked to were either therapists or therapists in training. And that's kind of what I thought. I thought the podcast had probably a third to half of its listeners were therapists. One of the questions I asked people is, how many of the episodes have you listened to? And almost everybody said all of them, which, granted, there's selection bias there in terms of people who would reach out to me. And some people said they'd listened to them multiple times, which that's really sweet. Yeah, that was kind. Another question I had for people was, do you like and listen to the mini episodes? Because those tend to be the least downloaded. So I was wondering, those 8, 10, 12-minute talks that I do alone, do people like those? And again, there's selection bias for sure in terms of who reached out to me, but those got very positive reviews. So I will be doing some more of those. Almost nobody that I talked to had done an iTunes review, and those are actually very helpful to help spread the podcast around. So anybody listening, take a minute, go onto iTunes, Apple Podcasts, and write a review. That would be awesome. And surprise, I learned from many of the listeners that should I retire or otherwise become indisposed, Saj would be the number one person that people want to hear from. And not surprisingly, the Saj episodes were very beloved, along with a bunch of others too. But I think there's something to the immediacy of Saj's story. And I even shared with a few listeners when we recorded that, Saj and I were sitting face to face, probably like 3 or 4 feet apart. And that the energy of that, I think, really came through on the recording and our friendship and, the time that we've known each other. So anyway, I'll let Saj know if something happens to me, he can take over. So let's move on to today's episode. I've long been deeply curious about the how and the why behind psychiatric healing. What's the special sauce? What are the crux moves? How does someone move from paralysis, hopelessness, and despair into movement and hope and gratitude? And I'm particularly interested in the healing process in psychotherapy. Now, we know that the relationship heals, but what does that really mean? And how exactly does the therapeutic relationship happen? What if the patient has no interest at all in change and or doesn't even recognize that change is needed? In this episode, Hilary McBride, a Canadian psychotherapist, researcher, author, and host of her own podcast called Other People's Problems, thoughtfully, eloquently describes her healing journey. Now, many of you listened to a prior interview with Hilary on Back from the Abyss at the end of season 1 in a podcast swap that I did with Conversations with a Wounded Healer. This episode is different, and Hilary has spoken publicly many times about her brutal struggle with body dysmorphia and disordered eating. But today, she and I go really deep into the therapeutic factors that saved her life. What most helped Hilary might surprise you. It's definitely not what is emphasized in eating disorder programs or therapy modalities such as CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. This episode was a total joy to record. I could have talked to Hilary for hours and hours, and I hope you get as much from it as I did.
I remember starting to restrict my food intake when I was I think I must have been in grade 6. And I think it was around the time of like normal puberty body changes and feeling like this was uncomfortable for me. Somehow this wasn't okay. Somehow I wanted to go back into like my child body. And I didn't have like rapid physiological development. I didn't have, breast tissue develop overnight that made me a target for sexual violence in the way that some young women do. But I remember having this red pair of swim shorts and I couldn't put them on. And I was really sad about that, as if there was like a kind of existential loss. And I think the way that I returned that towards myself was one of the earliest markers that I could see of the kind of pathology developing. So instead of saying like, oh, what, yeah, you like those, like, that's so sad to not be able to wear those anymore. Let's find you a new pair. In my mind, it felt like there was something wrong with me. And I remember telling a few peers about it, or it kind of showing up a little bit, the food restrictions showing up a little bit at school. Yeah. And so I'm checking in with my friends and seeing like, is my perception of reality or my changing body matching yours? And really starting to get curious about how my body was perceived from the outside. And I remember that shift, it didn't happen overnight, but almost like moving outside of my own house sort of phenomena. I think I talk about that somewhat in my writing, that there is this, like if our bodily home is ground zero for our existence, it's the place where we are most fully inhabiting our sense of self, then eating disorders and body preoccupation tend to take us outside of that into this like observer of the body, observer of the way we take up space. And I could really feel that happening gradually. Maybe not, I didn't have the language for it at that moment, but almost like moving into this kind of self-surveillance and noticing how that was showing up in what I was talking about and what I was preoccupied with. And it didn't really take over. It felt more like this kind of companion that I could access if I wanted to or not. And sometimes it would stir up and other times not. And then things really started to shift probably closer to when I was in grade 8. And I started introducing binging and purging, more purging at first, into, I would say almost into my routine, into my daily routine. And that experience came from it felt like almost like a it feels like a mini existential crisis. I mean, I look at the work that I do now and I see the kind of existential crises people have. And I don't want to diminish my own suffering, but this felt like a very normative developmental thing for someone who's going through puberty and a teenager to think like, my body is changing. How do I manage that? Am I supposed to manage that? Here's a way I can resolve this crisis internally, and started to really introduce more eating disorder behavior into my life. And
do you think it was something that you
Mhm.
felt like you discovered yourself, like you discovered, number one, that you, excuse me, were deeply unhappy with your body, and then that you discovered kind of these secret strategy for trying to control that? Or do you remember that? Because I think of eating disorders and behaviors as being contagious almost. And I'm wondering back then, like if you got the idea from someone else or had read about it, or if you discovered like your own special secret.
Yeah. You know what's, I have this list in my life. This will probably be forever one of the things that I learned to turn towards with compassion. But I have this list of things that I said I'd never do, and I've done all of them. And not in a I'd never do this, like, you know, I'm trying, like, more, it feels like moral failures in some way. And I remember having an incident on the playground when I was a kid. I must have been in grade 2. And my friend, I remember where we were. She was like, did you know that this is a thing that sometimes people do? They don't eat, so they lose weight, and they restrict, you know, and they purge and they binge. And this is the thing. And I remember saying to her, I would never do that. And it was 7 years later or something like that. The math might be off on that, but it was quite some time later that I started actively engaging in eating disorder behaviors. And I didn't have any peers at that time who were encouraging me to. I know that can happen, like dieting is a way to kind of find belonging or social connection. But this was very much a private experience that I think I learned about a long time ago, and for whatever reason came to me as an option. And I wasn't reading teen magazines. I wasn't reading kind of like heavy diet culture, media content. It really felt like a strategy to manage some internal distress as it was mediated through the pathway of understanding my body as being the problem.
Yeah. It's so interesting that you remember that one incident years before. And I've heard other people describe that they can one conversation or just one little moment in time, even years before, for example, eating disorder started, that people think that was the seed that just dropped in this field and just waited to grow.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's possible that sticks out to me so much because I made such a decisive declarative statement. And then I felt the shame, or have felt the shame since, of kind of going back on that statement and saying, oh, wow, I did something that I said I'd never do. And that's important to reckon with, like how much we misunderstand ourselves in terms of what we're capable of, or who we think we are, or the places that we'll go to, the lengths we'll go to manage our own suffering or distress. Like those experiences that we have of being desperate and needing to resolve some internal conflict or anxiety or dysregulation really allow us to be creative and look for resources that we might otherwise not have access to if we felt better rooted in some other tools.
Yeah, and how long did you suffer alone with your secret and your strategies?
Yeah, it started to become something that my parents knew about and talked about, but it was a couple years. It was a couple years of much more moderate level of eating disturbance and pathology than it became in the later years. It started to pick up more when I was like 16, 17, 18. So that window of time between 13 to 15, it seemed like I was better able to manage it, hide it. And I think my parents probably noticed some things, like they're perceptive and tuned in, but my body wasn't changing drastically, as is the case for many people who are on the eating disorder spectrum, that the body doesn't look so different. And so it goes easily unnoticed because we have these, I wouldn't call them tropes necessarily, but maybe these limited understandings of what eating disorder bodies look like that make us miss the kind of normative pathology that flies under the radar. And it wasn't till later until I started to to have more notable concerning symptoms that were observable to other people.
Yeah.
Oh, you know what? I'm just remembering something. I'm remembering something interesting that's kind of a part of this. I was at a summer camp when I must have been 11, and I wasn't engaged in any eating disorder behavior at that time. I remember it. But the camp counselor called my parents from the camp and said that they were worried about my eating. Mm-hmm. And my mom sat me down immediately after I got home and said, "We got this phone call. We're worried about you. We want to know what's going on. We want to help you if there's something going on. Can you tell us what's happening?" And I remember not like being so confused because that wasn't really a part of my life at that point. Mm-hmm. And yet my mom and I have talked about that moment since where she had said she knew something was already going on, but I didn't. It wasn't conscious for me. And I would actually argue I didn't think I was really in the eating disorder at that point. But it does make me wonder, like, what was showing up that someone else said that? Was there something else that was happening that I wasn't even aware of that was concerning? But it seemed like my mom might have already had her finger on the pulse of something. But the fact that I denied it vehemently because I didn't think that there was anything going on makes me wonder if she was more reluctant in the future to bring something up, or if I was more resistant. Like, those things I have yet to explore in much more depth. But there was a bit of a mismatch in terms of what she was perceiving, what I was experiencing. And I think that made something clunky for us along the way.
So how old were you when your mom said, "Hillary, it's time, we got to get you some help"? Yeah,
I think it was right around the time at like 15, 16. My birthday's in the fall. And I think it was in that summer right before I turned 16. And she started working really hard to get me the support that I needed. And I wasn't interested. I wasn't interested at all. And so thus ensued a series of, really just like elaborate deception on my part to make the eating disorder go underground further. And then there's no other way to say it. I was just lying to every single therapist that I saw. Mm-hmm. And I wouldn't like them, and I would get picky, and I would be resistant, and I would fight with her about going. And at this point I was still doing like outpatient treatment. And I would just really put up a fight and lie about every single thing, just every single thing.
Do you think you were ambivalent back then about having a problem and, wanting to hold on to this, this power, this control? Or do you think 15, 16-year-old you was actually thinking, no, there's not a problem. I got this.
No.
You all are gravely mistaken.
I knew there was a problem. At this point, the amount of deception, shame, and secrecy around my behavior, the amount of strategy going into planning restriction, planning secret exercise, planning binging, planning purging. There was like this whole full-time job I was doing trying to manage all of those pieces. And it was mine though. It was mine. And I think I really understand my eating disorder and eating disorders in general through the framework of Neva Paran, who's an eating disorder scholar who's really influenced my research and academic work. But she has labeled eating disorders as disorders of restricted agency. And the bid for agency in one's life through the negotiation of body and eating and kind of managing space and size. And when I look back on my family system and what was happening at that time, there was some unrest in the interpersonal dynamics that I felt. We'd had someone move into our home. My brother had moved off to university and he was my best friend, and I was in high school, and there was this new person in our home who we were kind of giving housing to. And the disturbance in the dynamic felt like an erasure of the space that was mine. And my mom and I started having much more conflict. My dad kind of played this kind of good cop role, and my mom played the bad cop, as it were, for treatment. And I really felt in this power struggle with her to negotiate the things in my life that felt stable and felt mine. And the more conflict we had, the more tense our relationship got, the more resistant I was to her intervention or her, making space for my intervention, and the deeper down into the eating disorder I dug as a kind of, resource for myself to feel some sense of, agency in my life.
Mm-hmm. It's almost like those early months and years of eating disorder treatment can seem like addiction treatment. The addict comes and thinks, okay, I know I have a huge problem, but I can't imagine any other way to live. So I have to keep lying and deceiving and doing this. And thank you, therapist, for trying to help, but I don't want it.
Yeah. And there was this in my 16th year, there was an intervention actually on the part of some of my peers. We had gone away for a big music festival and had come back, and my parents, that everyone had, I guess, made this whole plan to intervene. And I think they announced it to my parents, and I think my parents went along with it somewhat, although it was news to them. It's not like they were on the inside of this. And I felt extraordinarily isolated, and then further resistant to people and treatment. And so it reminds me of that thing that we see, the interventions around addiction, and how in that situation, I felt like I had to choose between community and the eating disorder. And the eating disorder at that point felt like the only thing that understood me, the only thing that was mine. And there was no way I was going to give it up.
Mm-hmm. And it's seeming like, from the way you describe it, that we could replay this scenario 100 ways, with your parents trying different things and different therapists and different programs. And for whatever reason, at that time in your life, the eating disorder was going to win. Yeah.
Yeah. Because I can't emphasize this enough. It was doing something for me. It was really offering me something. I'm thinking in terms of parts language and kind of what it was doing in terms of protecting parts of myself that felt overwhelmed with pain and loneliness and shame. And I understand now what it was doing. I didn't understand then. And I didn't understand that there could be something better on the other side. Mm-hmm. It just felt like the most necessary resource to support me, to be me in the world. And all of these people were asking me to give it up. And that felt
like
so
annihilation.
Threatening. Yes, exactly. Yeah.
So how did you move? I'm so curious how you go from, again, I think this state that now you see as a therapist working with these problems, and I see where you have someone who's so desperately clinging on to their eating disorder and this way of living and this control and this sense of agency, as you said. And then there has to be the shift, the shift towards change and acceptance and compassion. And what did that look like for you?
Yeah. I wish there are some specific moments that I can point to, and those are really nice, and they make for great sound bites and really help to clarify some specific turning points. But I wish it was more, I wish it was sexier than this, but I felt like by moving out of my parents' house, which was probably at one point extraordinarily terrifying for them, knowing how deeply I was in the eating disorder, and starting a dating relationship with the person who I'm now married to, and having some freedom around what I did with my time and my interests and my creativity, created a foundation for me to feel like I had more space and voice in my life. And I think it was under those conditions that I was allowed to start examining what might be under the surface and some of the pain for me. So those are harder things to point to or manufacture, especially in a treatment setting. But it was,
because it seems counterintuitive.
Exactly.
You think of, this, your child who's struggling terribly with whatever. And you want to bring them in closer to the nest, more support, more treatment, more observation, more love. And interesting, you said one of the key points was that you actually left the nest.
Yes.
And I can imagine your parents like, oh no, what's going to happen when she leaves? And yet for you, that was the first steps of change.
Which I think speaks to a broader principle that needs to be considered. Instead of one size fits all treatment, where is the person? Where is the person underneath the eating disorder? What does the person need? What purpose is it serving? And I know that that doesn't manualize very well. And I know that that doesn't apply to, work really well in formalized treatment settings where you're trying to get, outcome measures and get people pumped through beds and things like that. But for me to feel like I could have a voice in my own life was one of the most important things that I needed. And that will not be right for some other people. Shouldn't say voice, because I think we need to have responsibility taking an agency in treatment for it to be effective. But there would be some people who moving away from their parents' home when they're really in the throes of an eating disorder, it would be not good. It would be very dangerous.
Death sentence.
Exactly. Yeah. So instead of prescribing that as the most clinically significant factor in predicting my recovery, that's not accurate. But for me as a person, the way that all of these things factored in together, I think laid the soil for, you used the seeds metaphor earlier, for new seeds to be planted, or for me to dig up things that were already growing there.
Yeah. All those sessions before you left home, were those mostly for naught? I mean, that was a ton of time and energy and therapist appointments and probably hundreds of hours, I don't know, and different therapists. And did it set up any kind of scaffolding, or looking back, do you think, no, like you were so fixed in it that was really kind of lost treatment time, and the real therapy, meaningful therapy, didn't start till you left home?
I think that looking back, I am glad that my parents put all of that time and energy and money in, because even though I wasn't ready, there is never a single question in my mind that they cared or that they were doing everything they could. And so in terms of the broader story of how I fit into my attachment, frame, context, the knowing that I have that I was never given up on feels just as important for my therapeutic outcome as the part inside of me that had to choose to say yes.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
And I will probably for a long time be in a really interesting relationship with guilt and shame. Those are easy places for me to go in my own internal life and my internal world. And so I look back at that and think, oh, I'm so sorry it cost you so much for me to not move an inch. I'm so sorry you spent so much money on therapy that I was lying in, and driving me to appointments and getting me into treatment programs and getting me into getting me assessed by different psychiatrists and physicians and inpatient and outpatient and private. And I'm so sorry. I feel so sad that they gave so much and that they had to struggle, and that it couldn't relieve any of the distress that they felt as parents watching me hurt so much. But I know.
Do you think you were prone to guilt and shame? Like if we looked back on little Hillary, 5-year-old Hillary, 8-year-old, 12, that you had, sort of a temperamental disposition to that. And then the eating disorder and the lying and the secrecy and that just filled up that shame bucket. Or did the eating disorder or the shame come from that? Because again, I do a lot of addiction work, and I'm thinking addiction just builds so much guilt and shame.
Oh yeah.
And it can be chicken or the egg. Sometimes people go into addiction because they're just very much tending towards kind of guilt and shame. And other times, no, it's all the horrible things that happen in the addiction that lead to that.
Yeah. For me, the only way to understand it really is like through my theoretical framework, which I think is something I'm drawn to because it makes sense of my own experience as well. But I have been a highly sensitive kid. I had been a highly sensitive kid from the moment I was born. Just one of those people. My mom had to wash my laundry 3 times, once with soap, twice without. Otherwise, I'd break out in hives and, allergies and all sorts of things, like right from the get-go. And I think also extraordinarily in tune emotionally, in tune on a sensory level, and maybe in a transpersonal way as well. And the experience of being a little human and feeling such intensity constantly lends itself well to the different ways that our society caps that to make that go away. And I think of shame as a cap on that. It's the inhibitory affect. It's the like, I'm going to tuck this away. I'm going to tuck me away. I'm going to tuck my knowing about the world and my body and our context and these relationships away. And I'm going to make it about me. I'm going to make it that I'm bad. As a way to get through this world and make you comfortable and make you comfortable and make you comfortable. And so I think about shame as as another strategy for managing what I didn't otherwise know how to manage. And so if we come back to this moment of being in elementary school and noticing my body is changing, I think I'd already had a kind of well-developed capacity to turn things against myself as a way to make them disappear.
Jumping back to you leaving the nest, finding some space and agency and just room to be.
Yeah.
And then you're continuing in therapy. And now it sounds like there is a different context that you're ready to engage and start to be honest.
Yeah. And I had, again, a number of, I think at this point when I was in university, I was still being very, very, very closely involved with an outpatient program that was constantly trying to get me, more resources. And I was playing cat and mouse with them a little bit because I wasn't so convinced that was something I needed or wanted, but it was obviously clear from, some of my vitals and things like that I needed to be followed very closely. But I had a new therapist, and she was a little different than the other ones. This was in an outpatient treatment program, and I wrote about her quite a bit in my first book. She didn't really want to talk about the eating disorder so much. And that was very interesting to me. That was very interesting.
She's doing an end around.
Yeah. I was very intrigued by that. And we drummed, we watched TED Talks and discussed them. She introduced me to feminist theory. We did art. We did movement. We talked about really like critical analysis of sociocultural and sociopolitical contexts that we're in. And I wouldn't normally, like now as a clinician, I'd be like, oh, that was like really took me, that would really take a person out of their inner world. But if a person is really not wanting to be in their inner world and they're wanting to develop, they're needing space to find their voice in the world, I think you can go in the back door. And I think that was a way for me. And so she really invited me to start to think critically about the world that I was in. And I remember I was not feeling very much at that point. Like I wouldn't say that I was, fit the criteria for alexithymia or had, I don't know. I won't go down that rabbit trail.
Yeah, but I just kind of numbed.
Just numbed.
Just overall numbed to the world
numbed.
And to yourself.
Yeah, and really not, at the same time, kind of like very desperate and anxious internally because there's all this stuff going on, but not feeling real feelings and not feeling connected to myself or regulating emotion. And I remember getting angry in her office, not at her. It was kind of about, really, it was about the social construction of women's bodies in a Western context, and feeling for the first time like I wasn't vain for having an eating disorder. I was being a good woman. I was being everything that I had been told to be to accrue social value. And I didn't like that. I didn't like that I had somehow been told or shown that there had to be less of me for me to have like jockey power some way, and that somehow then I had felt bad about that, or like it had caused me suffering and I had then blamed myself for that. Like there was a kind of shifting that took place where I was able to see there was much more going on here than my body being bad and needing to go away. And it really, in the same way that kind of psychedelic experiences do, like it felt like I saw the interconnectedness between all of these systems that had kept me and stuck and had reinforced the way that my pain originated and how it manifested and then how it was praised and then pathologized, like really this unfolding of understanding of the complex web of systems that were showing up as I lived and moved through the world with so much pain.
Do you think your therapist, do you think she read that in you and she thought, this is the way to Hillary? We're going to bond over all this other stuff and sort of intellectual and somatic and playful level. But what's going to grab Hillary is sort of seeing the eating disorder in a social context and a feminist context. Or do you think that just sort of organically unfolded as the two of you just became closer and
it was very much her style of work. So I don't think it was unique to me. And there were a number of times that she would make generalized statements about women with eating disorders that told me, oh, this is your worldview playing out here and how you choose treatment and intervention. But I also felt very seen by her and I felt known. And it was like I remember she said something to me that I will never forget. I've never forgotten. She said, women with eating disorders are philosopher queens. And it was like I understood on some deeper level that there was a goodness in me that had somehow gotten hijacked by the eating disorder, but that I was not all bad. And that there was actually something very special about the way that my brain and nervous system worked. The most meaningful impact was the humanizing impact. Like, oh, there's good in me. There's good in me.
Yeah. Therapists often talk about this idea of, is it the relationship that heals or the modality? And it sounds like you described her really interesting way of engaging you. And as you look back, I wonder, was the special sauce there? A, you were ready. B, she knew how to show you that she could see the beauty and the goodness and the awesomeness in you. Was it her techniques that as you said, she didn't even go to the eating disorder. She went around it and did a very skillful snuck in the back door with, and knew how she could reach you.
Yeah. I mean, all of the variables that we hear about treatment efficacy come to mind, like, intervention, chosen, the relationship, client factors, external factors, like the things that we can't quite put our finger on, the client readiness, all those things really feel like they make sense here. It was the right person and the right time and the right approach for me. And I think there was a lot that she did that didn't land for me, but I felt safe enough with her that I had been able to access anger, and anger felt like a return of my voice. And as soon as I started to feel like I could have a voice about things, I could push back a little bit on her. And that felt like a choice that I could make. And that felt really safe to do with her. And her style of holding me allowed that to happen. And I could really lean in to negotiating who I was in that space. Like I think about Wallen talks about therapy as like the developmental crucible within which we can rediscover and reimagine the emergence of the self. And especially when we are in a secure attachment with someone. And that really felt different, because when I think about, I don't want to get so neo-Freudian and do this comparison with my mother as well. I mean, it's hard not to in this moment, the low-hanging fruit. But I think about how my mom and our relationship was so rigid, because the more I was in the eating disorder, the more afraid she was, and the more tightly she controlled me, and the harder it was for me to then have agency, because it was threatening probably to my safety and to her sense of control over my health outcomes. And so we just got into this really gnarly groove together. And I got to negotiate some of these very important developmental steps, like pushing back and being a teenager and having anger and figuring out what my place in the world was, with a therapist who could hold that and who gave me room to do that. And I very much felt myself leaning into that process, and like concurrently was joining consciousness raising groups and engaging in feminist action, and was falling in love with this man who was, the way that he has loved me through my life has been one of the most therapeutic, transformative, transpersonal, holy experiences I think I'll ever have. And I can't separate that out from this other experience of therapy.
Yeah. Right. I mean, you began healing in relationship with her.
Yes.
You began healing in relationship with him.
Oh my goodness. And this, like the beautiful thing too, I remember this therapist, her name was Liz. Her and I had an argument one time because I came in and I said, I want to talk to you about sexuality. I want to talk to you about this. She's like, yes, it's really hard for women who have eating disorders. They often shut down. There's kind of the, you heard of sexual anorexia. And she really missed me. And I was like, no. I think there's something happening for me here. I can feel pleasure in my body. And that feels good. And it reminds me that my body is safe. And it was like, she didn't know how to, she wasn't expecting me to say that.
She said, wait, you're way further along. You're in chapter 12.
Yeah, that's right.
You're supposed to be shut down.
Yeah, exactly. And I think not everybody has experiences like that with like a first sexual partner. But for me, in my relationship with this man, I was safe in my body, and his affirmation of safety and creating of this context that was both very nurturing and electric and safe and supportive, and like all of these things created again another relational context where I could relax into the experience of being myself without it creating conditional belonging. And it was an essential part of my treatment to be loved by him. I wish there was a better way to say that.
It sounds like she recognized that your eating disorder was not the problem.
Exactly.
It was a manifestation of a whole bunch of things, of you being a highly sensitive soul and parent-child and a whole bunch of stuff. And
yes.
Did she ever then turn directly into the eating disorder, or did the therapy continue to be, as you said, kind of everything but, like everything in the context and the whole scaffolding around it? But did she continue to really not talk about the eating disorder with you?
Yeah, she really didn't. I had a psychiatrist and a dietitian and a GP who were doing more of that heavy lifting. And then, I mean, we can get into I preferred probably not to get into much extensive detail about this, but she ended up leaving that position before we were done treatment together. And a new therapist came in, and I started to have a regression in terms of what was happening in my growth and my healing. And that was actually probably the last time that I was connected to an inpatient program. And it was after we had done all of this beautiful work. And I wouldn't say it's because Liz was gone. It was like there was all of these things. She wasn't the one holding the keys to my recovery at that point. But there was a kind of sense that there was lots of pathology that was still ongoing, and it really needed to be actively addressed, because the process of me philosophizing about the social construction of women's bodies was like helpful, but probably not helpful enough for my medical team.
Yeah.
And I had a therapist at that point who was like so lovely and so kind, but I don't think she knew how to handle that I needed a place where I could experiment with being spicy a little bit and like having some like push pull as a way to be like, oh, good work. Yes, I'm fully here and you're fully here. And she would want me to do lots of mindfulness if I, had an opinion about something and challenged her. And it seemed like to kind of, again, to cap me to under the guise of like regulation. And I just remember thinking, I said to her on so many occasions, this new therapist, like I'm trying to ask you for what I need, and I feel like you're not hearing me. And I did that so many times, like in a heroic way. Like a patient should not have to, on that many occasions, be like, you're not seeing me, you're missing me. Can we try this? Can we try this? I want to do this in therapy. I want to go here. Can we try this? And it was like I was asking her to do attachment and psychodynamic work with me, and she wanted to teach me how to deep breathe.
Yeah.
And so that relationship went on for some degree, because when I came out of being an inpatient, I was back into this outpatient setting, and she was the therapist who connected me to all of these other care providers who I needed to be close to, my nutritionist and my psychiatrist and whatnot. But eventually a really big shift was when I said, like, I'm not going to be a part of this program anymore. This isn't working for me. I'm stable enough. I need to find a therapist and a community where I am not so over-identified with the eating disorder.
Mm-hmm.
And that was another big, like movement point for me. They had wanted me to go back into treatment, into a residential program, not into an inpatient program in a hospital setting, but like a community-based residential program. And I decided that instead I was going to go to graduate school. And everyone thought I was absolutely nuts.
Leaving the nest again.
Yes.
leaving your intensive eating disorder nest. Like, nope.
Yeah, like you're capping me. Like, I'm getting out of here. This doesn't feel good. I need a place where I can rehearse what it's like to be my sense of self outside of the label that you're giving me. And I'd like some normal community. I'd like some normal interaction. I'm tired of groups where a lot of my peer interaction is with other people who are like at a certain stage of their eating disorder development. And I am so ready to rehearse something that feels whole. And it was, again, another move of agency on my part that I think probably terrified the team. But there was a sense of, I was choosing life. I was choosing myself. And that's the place that I think all of the recovery comes from. And I wasn't worried.
So it sounds like as you said a few minutes ago, individualizing treatment is so crucial. And for you to be primarily identified as, oh, you have an eating disorder, let's talk about it, or you have an eating disorder, let's do this intensive treatment program, that was not helpful. What was helpful was, So, but I'm also guessing, although I want to hear what you have to say, that for some people, that is what they need.
Oh, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think this is why we need to create clinicians and programs and interventions which allow us to see the person, to see what the person needs, instead of blindly applying the same template of response to every single person who comes through the door, because there are some people who will really need that, and it will be the most resourcing, healing, validating, nurturing thing for them.
Yeah. It reminds me of an attending in residency who said, as we're all learning psychotherapy, we so want an algorithm. We want to paint by number. We want we want direction. He said, but the best therapies are individually created paintings.
Yes.
He said every therapist is going to have his or her own favorite colors and brushes and styles, but each patient client really deserves and needs their own painting. And I love this story, how this is unfolding, because your story, I think, is very different than some people's recoveries. But then I think the theme is that you're saying is it's going to be different for everybody.
Yes, it will be. And so we need to be adaptable as clinicians. We need to be human. We need to be able to see people. And I think it's really hard to do if we can't see ourselves or haven't been seen. There's a kind of contagion to interconnectedness that allows us to redistribute that back into our work as healthcare providers. And I could digress about that at length. But I do want to say there's a few other pieces that really clicked things for me, because those are nice moments to talk about on a podcast. It wasn't all just like, me lying in therapy for years until I decided to stop. I went back to grad school and of course was still like really interested in eating disorder stuff, but trying to, again, like remove myself a little bit from that and figure out how this all fit into this new understanding that I had about social context, and decided to start researching body image, because I kept reading in the literature, body image, shows up as this body image issues show up as this precursor to eating disorder behavior. Of course, I now understand it is much more complex than that, but I kept thinking, oh, well, this is something I need to research then. And of course, research is me search. We all know that. We're all just working our stuff out. And I started to find data in study after study as I'm doing my literature reviews for my research, and seeing that there was really quite an abundance of understanding around pathology and how it develops, but still this really missing, this big gap in the literature about how do we do well? How do we love our bodies? What does that look like? And how do we get there? Do those people exist? And these numbers kept showing up over and over and over again, that normative body dissatisfaction is so written into gender identity for women that it might be considered actually part of being a woman in a Western context. And I remember having this kind of like woof reaction to that, like, yuck, that's not true. That can't be true. There's something amiss here. And started off on this journey of understanding, what does it mean to love our bodies, and how do we instill that from the beginning, and what gets in the way, but how do we repair that through our lives, instead of just this hyper focus on pathology, which we can so easily do in the world of psychology. And I know in psychiatry as well, it's kind of the bread and butter. And really wanting to have a new angle on the conversation. And it was then that I started to discover embodiment and the research around embodiment as the kind of felt lived experience of being a body, which felt different than this thing that I'd mentioned started happening for me in elementary school, where I moved outside of my body to evaluate my body, to self-survey, to judge. And it was like, oh, that's the process of coming back home again. Oh, I don't have to just look at my body from the outside constantly and say, well, I used to hate what that looks like, but I don't anymore. And, I can love my appearance no matter what. It was like, no. There was something that happened even before I thought appearance was the only thing about me. And that was that it was a lot to be in my body. And so I had to leave to try to manage that. But maybe I don't have to leave anymore. Maybe I can come back home and I can clean up the house and I can make it feel cozy inside. And embodiment really started to be this thing that captivated me. And I was researching it and writing about it and learning about it and, collaborating with different scholars, and eventually ended up writing this textbook with a colleague of mine about embodiment and eating disorders as an innovative approach to treatment, to say, like, we can't just keep reinforcing the idea that we're cognitive beings who need to evaluate cognition, and the cognition of the patient needs to match the idealized version of the cognition of the treatment provider, as if, we keep telling women with eating disorders and people with eating disorders, you're thinking wrong. Your thinking is bad. Think the way that we think, and then you'll be fixed. Like, no. Where's the lived experience, the phenomenology of being human? And I remember my husband came home one night, and I'm working on this textbook about embodiment, and the lights are off, and all he can see is my face lit up by the glow of my laptop. And it's like 11 at night. And I had forgotten to get up. I had been there all day. I hadn't eaten. I hadn't stretched. I don't think I got to the bathroom in hours. Like, in this hyper-focused, like borderline hypomanic episode, just going ape on this research paper, but totally disembodied. And it was this wake-up call for me, like, oh, again, it's not enough to think about embodiment. I need to start practicing it. And it felt like that moment was another click into place of what the journey of recovery looked like. So I started doing more authentic movement, and I started engaging in practices that would allow me to inhabit myself again and pay attention to sensory cues. And that for me felt like, again, one of the last clicks and most recent clicks into feeling like, oh, I'm home again.
Yeah. What does that look like minute to minute, hour to hour, day to day for you now to be more embodied and realizing that, your superpower of your cognition and your analytical self is actually getting you into a lot of trouble?
You're right. Yeah. So the moment to moment, I would say, is like it feels like a constant tuning in. So instead of my selfness or consciousness, I wish there was a less abstract way to describe this, but it's more like my selfness exists somewhere between my hips and my shoulders, instead of self being in my head and I have to dip down into my body to ask what's going on there. And then I go back up to my head and take the elevator up. It's more of like I'm inhabiting a core space inside. And so I'm just noticing and paying attention to things like, oh, I felt that inside of me. Oh, someone said that. I noticed a reaction. What does that mean for me? And then integrating, almost like going up, taking the elevator up to think, oh, how do I make sense of what just happened? But paying attention to sensory information, noticing comfort. I've been known in my social circle for sitting in very strange ways because I'm like, it just feels good for my hips. I'm just draping my leg over the back of the couch, even though that's not how we typically sit on couches, because it feels good for my back right now. And I don't feel interested in, I'm not going to go outside of what would be a professional way of conducting myself in my workplace or whatnot. But I feel so much more comfortable going, oh, I need this. And I can give that to myself. And whether this is rest or movement or attention to emotion or food or a change in posture, it feels like the dialogue between the sensing and the responding parts of me are like very closely connected. And that exists inside me.
Yeah. How does embodiment, if it does, translate to more acceptance and self-compassion with body image? Or is there a couple steps in between those?
Yeah. Well, I think I see my body as so much more than the image of it. And so it's almost like I've moved the locus of control to an internal place instead of the appearance-based place. So I think it just matters less. It's like, it feels more like an afterthought for me. And I take pride in how I appear and how I dress myself and hygiene and all of those pieces. But I don't feel like my worth or my value or my selfness is restricted to how I evaluate the way I show up appearance-wise in the world. Even in terms of the shape and size of my body and how my body changes as I age and skin and things like that, it just doesn't feel as important because I feel so much more connected to the sense of wisdom that comes from the interoceptive place.
It almost sounds like a shift from all form to form and function. That you still, as you said, recognize that it's important how we appear in the world, and you do put importance on that, but you're much more focused on your body and what it can do and how it can move you and bring you pleasure and how it inhabits the world.
Yes, and yet I'll just push back on some of the language a little bit there, because I think of the body, Merleau-Ponty and some of the continental philosophers who've talked extensively about embodiment as the place of consciousness have reminded us that we have these two ways of talking about our body. We have the body as an object, an it. Mm-hmm. And it's easy for us to inhabit or to relate to the body as an it, like a good it, but an it. Mm-hmm. But we have this other thing available to us, which is, Merleau-Ponty called it corps subjectif. So the body, the subjective body, the lived body, which has been translated to the body for self, the body as self. And I think about the body less actually as function. So it's almost like neither form or function, more like being. And being sits in this kind of numinous space that is both very immediate and transcendent, a very immanent and transpersonal. And being can't be qualified or limited to function. Yeah. Because where I struggle with the functional relationship we have with our bodies is when the function starts to change as we age. I have chronic pain in my body. I have injuries that I'm carrying from traumatic events, car accidents and whatnot. I have reminded myself that my being is still good. My being is for life, even when the function is compromised.
Yeah. That's so interesting. I'm glad you did push back on that. It makes me think of, this focus on being. It suggests that both meditation and psychedelics could have a really interesting role.
Oh, yeah.
In body image and eating disorder treatment, because people get so in their minds, so fixated on this visual representation, but you're right, missing the being. I love how you describe that. And anything that can bring us back fully into ourselves, our being, that we're not just this reflection in the mirror or just a functional self, but that we have this energy, this connectedness, this amazingness that is us, that I think just gets overwhelmed by a lot of other psychological and psychiatric stuff.
I think you're right. And it's so much so that there's actually a move within the embodiment community to say mindfulness is too restricted to cognition. And so what we need actually is bodyfulness. And this is a term that comes from Christine Caldwell, who's a somatic therapist and instructor and theorist. But to be bodyful is to be present to what's happening as the self, instead of just noticing again in a kind of detached, cognitive, objectifying way of the self, which orients us towards noticing thoughts, stopping thoughts, changing thoughts. Other things, but this is wordplay. It can be semantics, but it can also be a language protest to say, let's inhabit our bodily selves in an attuned, compassionate, present way, instead of just noticing our thoughts as the chief experience of existence. Oh,
I like that so much.
Yeah. And I'm thinking about, some of the research out of the UK. I think it's Rosalind Watts and is it Accept, Connect, Embody model for psilocybin treatment. And her research with her colleagues has looked at how embodiment is this theme that is woven through psychedelic experiences, where everything that is understood, any of the insights, any of the interpersonal, relational, cognitive changes that happen are felt and sensed and lived from the place of the subjective self, which in those moments is also somehow transcending the body into all interconnectedness, but it is very much felt and sensed and rooted in the right here.
Yeah. Wow, that's so interesting. I'm just looking at the time and realizing that we got to sign off here in a couple minutes, but
Sure.
Oh, I have so many more things I want to ask you. But let me just summarize. I love this, Hillary. Your treatment journey would be, I was just thinking, okay, a couple years of deny, lie, hide, flee the nest, find a therapist who deeply cares about you, sees you, and doesn't talk about eating disorders. And then she leaves, relapse, get in some eating disorder treatment, but then flee that and do your own research and find embodiment.
Nailed it. It's easy peasy.
Right.
Can we manualize that somehow?
I know. Well, I love that because, as you said at the beginning, I think it's so tempting for all of us to look for this really complicated problems. Like, what's the solution? And I think we keep coming back to, each person has their own painting. There are some universals like that. I see you. I'm going to be here for you. I'm patient. You can leave and come back. You can take that path that maybe all of us think isn't the best path, but we're still going to be here for you. It's really inspirational.
Oh, wow. Thank you.
Yeah.
I feel so heard. Thank you, Craig.
Each person's healing journey is unique, and yet each is the same. Hillary had to flee her childhood home to find herself. She had to develop a healthier sense of autonomy and freedom and agency. And only then was she able to open up to a therapist. And a therapist who had the intuition and wisdom to talk about most everything except body image and food. Meaningful change is really, really hard. It has to start with a willingness to do the work. And the route to this willingness, that's where the mystery and the beauty lies. Yeah, our journeys are all so different and also kind of the same. And I find some real solace in that. Thanks for listening to Back from the Abyss. And if you like this episode, please share it with a friend or anyone else who might find meaning in these stories. And also, a huge shout out to my good friend and sound guy, Chris Johnson. I couldn't do this without you.